Her ex-husband was waiting to mock poor housewife. On divorce day, but she arrived in Rolls-Royce. The courthouse steps were cold that morning. Marcus Chen stood at the top like a king waiting for his defeated enemy. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed. His watch cost more than most people made in a year. His smile was cruel and ready. He had practiced his words all night long in front of the mirror. He wanted them to hurt. He wanted them to destroy what was left of the woman he once promised to love forever. Today was divorce day, the final day when he would officially throw away his wife like garbage. He had already told everyone she was nothing, a pathetic housewife who cooked and cleaned while he built an empire. She had no money, no friends left, no future. He had made sure of that. Marcus looked at his phone. 9:30 in the morning. The hearing was at 10. She would arrive soon, probably walking from the bus stop in her old worn shoes. Maybe she would cry. Maybe she would beg. The thought made him smile wider. Behind him stood Victoria Lang, his business partner and new woman. She wore a red dress that cost $5,000. Her jewelry sparkled in the morning sun. She touched Marcus's arm and whispered something that made him laugh. They looked perfect together. Rich, powerful, untouchable. The small crowd of reporters waited nearby. Marcus had called them himself. He wanted everyone to see his victory. He wanted the whole city to know that Elena Chen was finished, that she was nothing without him, that she would crawl back to the poverty he had rescued her from 10 years ago. But sometimes life has different plans. Sometimes the person you destroy finds a way to rise from the ashes. Sometimes karma arrives not with thunder, but with the quiet purr of a Rolls-Royce engine. This is the story of her ex-husband was waiting to mock poor housewife on divorce day, but she arrived in Rolls-Royce. A story about pain that becomes power, about tears that become triumph, about a woman who lost everything but found herself. Elena Chen had not slept for 3 nights. Her small apartment was empty except for a mattress on the floor and a single chair. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter next to a glass of water and 2 pills for her headache. She stared at them every morning but could not bring herself to look at the details. Marcus had taken everything. The house she had decorated with love. The car she had chosen for their anniversary. The friends she thought cared about her. Even her dignity. He had stripped it all away piece by piece over the last 6 months since he announced he was leaving her for Victoria. The cruelest part was how he did it. Not quietly, not with respect, but loudly, publicly, making sure everyone knew she was worthless. He held dinner parties where he introduced Victoria as his future, while Elena served food like a maid. He told business partners that Elena was too stupid to understand money. He laughed with his family about how she had gained weight and lost her beauty. Every word was a knife. Every laugh was poison. And Elena took it all because she did not know what else to do. She had given him 15 years of her life. She had supported him when he was nobody. When his first business failed and he cried in her arms. When banks rejected his loans and he wanted to give up. She had been his strength, his hope, his everything, until he did not need her anymore. The morning of the divorce arrived like a storm cloud. Elena sat on the floor of her empty apartment and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror she had found at a thrift store. Her face was thin from not eating properly. Her eyes were red from crying. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders. She looked exactly like what Marcus said she was. Broken, defeated, nothing. She had 1 dress left that was decent enough for court. Navy blue and simple. She had sold all her good clothes to pay rent. Her shoes had holes in them, but she had colored them with a marker so they would not show. She had $4 in her purse. Not enough for a taxi. She would have to take 2 buses to reach the courthouse. The thought of walking up those steps, seeing Marcus and Victoria, facing the cameras he had surely arranged, made her want to disappear. To run away and never come back. But she had to go. She had to sign the papers. She had to end this nightmare even if it meant giving him the satisfaction of seeing her destroyed. Elena stood up slowly. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled as she picked up her purse. She looked around the empty apartment one more time. This was her life now. This emptiness. This silence. This nothing. She walked to the door and put her hand on the handle. Behind her, on the counter, her phone suddenly rang. She almost did not answer it. Who would call her now? Everyone had abandoned her. But something made her turn back. Something made her pick up the phone. The voice on the other end would change everything. It was a voice from her past. A voice she had not heard in 5 years. A voice that would transform her pain into power and her tears into triumph. The voice belonged to her grandmother's lawyer, and what he said next made Elena's knees buckle and her heart stop. "Miss Elena, I have been trying to find you for months. Your grandmother passed away last year. She left you something in her will, something significant. Are you sitting down? Because what I'm about to tell you will change your life forever." Elena's hand gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. Her grandmother had been estranged from the family for years. Elena barely knew her, had met her only a few times as a child. She remembered a stern woman with sharp eyes who lived far away and never visited. "What did she leave me?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. The lawyer paused, then spoke words that made the room spin. "Everything, Miss Elena. She left you everything. The entire Jang Corporation, the hotels, the restaurants, the real estate empire. Your grandmother was not just wealthy, she was one of the richest women in Asia, and she chose you as her sole heir. The fortune is worth approximately $800 million. The phone slipped from Elena's hand and clattered on the floor. $800 million. The words echoed in her mind like a dream. It could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like her. She was nobody. She was nothing. She was the worthless housewife that Marcus threw away. But the lawyer kept talking, his voice coming from the phone on the floor. "There is more, Miss Elena. Your grandmother left a letter explaining why she chose you. She wrote that she had been watching you from afar. She saw how you stood by your husband when he had nothing. She saw your loyalty, your strength, your dignity, even in suffering. She saw the business plans you had written years ago, the ones your husband mocked. She believed in you, Miss Elena. She wrote that you reminded her of herself before the world tried to break her. And she wanted to give you what nobody gave her, a chance to rise." Elena fell to her knees and picked up the phone with shaking hands. Tears streamed down her face, but they were different tears now. Not tears of despair, but tears of disbelief, of hope, of a feeling she had forgotten existed. When can I access this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Immediately," the lawyer replied. "I can meet you within the hour. I have already prepared everything. The bank accounts are ready to transfer. The properties are waiting for your signature. There is just one thing your grandmother insisted on. She wanted you to promise that you would never let anyone make you feel worthless again, that you would stand tall and claim your power. Can you make that promise, Miss Elena?" Elena wiped her tears and stood up slowly. Her reflection in the cracked mirror looked different now. She still saw the thin face and tired eyes, but behind them she saw something else, a spark, a flame, a woman who was about to rise from the ashes. "Yes," she said firmly. "I promise." The lawyer gave her an address, a building downtown, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. Elena hung up the phone and stood in the silence of her apartment. The divorce hearing was in 1 hour. Marcus would be waiting with his cruel smile and practiced insults. Victoria would be there in her expensive dress. The cameras would be ready to document her humiliation. But things were different now. Everything was different now. Elena walked to her small closet and pulled out the simple navy dress. She put it on slowly, carefully. She fixed her hair as best she could. She put on the shoes with the hidden holes. She looked in the mirror one more time. She still looked like the same woman. But inside, a transformation was beginning. A plan was forming in her mind. She would go to the lawyer first, sign the papers, make everything official, and then she would go to the courthouse. But not as the broken housewife Marcus expected, not as the worthless woman he had discarded. She would arrive as someone else entirely, someone he never imagined she could be. The thought made her smile for the first time in months. It was a small smile, a secret smile, the kind of smile that comes when you know something nobody else knows. When you hold a card nobody expects you to play. Elena left her apartment and walked to the bus stop. But she did not take the bus. Instead, she called the one taxi driver in the city who had been kind to her during her worst days. An old man named George who had driven her home from the hospital after she collapsed from exhaustion and stress. "George," she said when he answered, "I need a favor. One last ride. I promise I will pay you back in ways you cannot imagine." George arrived in 5 minutes. His old taxi squeaked and rattled, but his smile was warm. "Where to, Miss Elena?" he asked kindly. "Downtown. The Morrison Law Building. And George, after today, your life is going to change too. I promise you that." The ride to the law firm felt like a dream. Elena watched the city pass by through the window. The same city where she had been humiliated, where people whispered about her failure, where she had become invisible. But cities can be conquered. Cities can be owned. And sometimes the person everyone ignores becomes the person everyone notices. The Morrison Law Building was 50 floors of glass and steel. Elena had walked past it many times but never imagined entering. The lobby was marble and gold. The elevators were silent and fast. The law firm was on the top floor with views of the entire city. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was an elderly man with kind eyes and steady hands. He had served her grandmother for 30 years. He treated Elena not like a poor housewife, but like the heir to an empire. Which she was. The papers were overwhelming. Hundreds of pages. Properties in 12 countries. Bank accounts in Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong. Hotels that hosted presidents and movie stars. Restaurants with 3 Michelin stars. Technology companies. Pharmaceutical investments. Art collections worth millions. Her grandmother had built an empire quietly, carefully, brilliantly. And now it was all Elena's. "Your grandmother was remarkable," Mr. Harrison said as Elena signed document after document. "She came from nothing. Her husband left her with 3 children and no money. Everyone said she would fail. But she built all of this with her own hands, her own mind, her own will. She saw the same strength in you, Miss Elena. She wrote that you were the only one in the family who inherited her spirit. The others inherited only greed." Elena's hand trembled as she signed the final document. It was done. She was no longer Elena Chen, discarded housewife. She was Elena Zhang, heir to the Zhang Empire, one of the wealthiest women in the country. The transformation was complete on paper. Now she had to make it complete in reality. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "I need several things done immediately. First, I need a car, something appropriate for my new position. Second, I need a driver, someone discreet and professional. Third, I need a phone call made to the Zhang Corporation Board. I want them to know their new chairwoman will be taking control immediately. And fourth, I need you to come with me to the courthouse. I have a divorce to finalize." Mr. Harrison smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Miss Elena, your grandmother anticipated all of this. The car is already waiting downstairs. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, custom made. Your grandmother ordered it specifically for this day. She knew about your situation with your husband. She knew about the divorce. She planned everything. The driver is already hired. The board has been notified. And I would be honored to accompany you to court." Elena stood up slowly. Her simple navy dress and worn shoes looked out of place in the luxurious office. But clothes did not make the woman. Power did. And power was what she now possessed. They took the private elevator down to the underground garage. And there it was. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight blue with silver trim, more beautiful than anything Elena had ever seen. The driver stood beside it, a woman in her 40s with professional bearing and intelligent eyes. "Good morning, Ms. Zhang," the driver said with a slight bow. "My name is Catherine. I will be your personal driver from today forward. Where would you like to go?" Elena looked at her watch. 9:45. The divorce hearing was at 10. Marcus would be there by now. Waiting. Watching. Ready to destroy her with words he had practiced. Ready to humiliate her in front of everyone. Ready to document her defeat. The thought of his face when she arrived made her smile grow wider. "The courthouse, Catherine. We have a divorce to attend. And Catherine, do not hurry. I want to arrive exactly at 10 o'clock. Not a minute before. Not a minute after. Timing is everything." The Rolls-Royce moved through the city streets like a ship through calm water. Silent, smooth, powerful. Elena sat in the back with Mr. Harrison beside her. He held a briefcase with documents that would soon become very important. Documents about Marcus's business, about loans he had taken using forged signatures, about tax evasion he thought nobody would discover, about the prenuptial agreement he had forced Elena to sign but which was invalid due to coercion. Elena's grandmother had investigated everything. She had prepared for this day like a general preparing for war. As they drove, Elena thought about the last 15 years. The young woman who had fallen in love with Marcus when they were both nobody. The wife who had supported him through every failure. The partner who had given him ideas he claimed as his own. The woman who had slowly disappeared as his success grew. She thought about the dinner parties where he humiliated her. The friends who abandoned her on his orders. The family who chose his money over her pain. She thought about the nights she cried herself to sleep. The days she could not eat from anxiety. The moments she wanted to end everything. All of that pain had led to this moment. This car, this power, this chance for something she had never imagined. Justice. The courthouse came into view. Even from a distance, Elena could see the crowd. Reporters with cameras. People with phones ready to record. And at the top of the steps, Marcus and Victoria. He wore his most expensive suit. She wore red like blood. They stood like royalty waiting for the peasant to crawl up the steps and beg for mercy. Elena watched them through the tinted window of the Rolls-Royce. They could not see her, but she could see everything. Marcus kept checking his phone, checking the time, looking down the street for the bus that would bring his pathetic ex-wife. Victoria laughed at something he said, probably another cruel joke about Elena. The reporters looked bored. They had been promised drama, but so far there was nothing to see. 10 o'clock, Catherine announced quietly. "Shall I pull up to the front, Miss Jang?" Elena took a deep breath. 15 years of marriage were about to end. But more importantly, a new life was about to begin. A life where she had power, where she had value, where nobody could ever make her feel worthless again. "Yes, Catherine. Right in front. And please, take your time parking. I want everyone to see the car properly." The Rolls-Royce turned the corner and glided toward the courthouse. The first person to notice was a photographer. His camera swung toward the car. Then another noticed. Then another. Within seconds, every camera was pointed at the midnight blue phantom approaching like destiny itself. Marcus noticed the commotion. He turned to look, his expression annoyed. Who would dare arrive at his moment of triumph? Who would steal attention from his victory? When he saw the Rolls-Royce, his face showed confusion. When it stopped directly in front of the courthouse steps, his face showed irritation. When the driver got out and walked around to open the back door, his face showed curiosity. And when Elena stepped out, his face showed something she had never seen before. Pure, complete, devastating shock. She emerged from the car like a queen from her carriage. Yes, she still wore the simple navy dress. Yes, her shoes were still worn. But her posture was different. Her eyes were different. Her entire presence was different. She did not look down. She did not hurry. She did not shrink. She stood tall and looked directly at Marcus, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that made him step back. Behind her, Mr. Harrison emerged with his briefcase. His presence added weight to the moment. Everyone knew who he was. The lawyer who represented only the wealthiest clients. The man who had never lost a case. The professional who chose his clients carefully and represented them ruthlessly. If he was with Elena, it meant something significant had changed. The cameras went crazy. Flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters pushed forward shouting questions. But Elena did not respond. She simply walked forward, each step measured and calm. The crowd parted before her like water. She climbed the courthouse steps slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Victoria grabbed his arm, her perfect composure cracking. She whispered something urgent in his ear, but he did not respond. He could not move. He could not speak. He could only stare at the woman he had destroyed walking toward him like karma itself. When Elena reached the top of the steps, she stopped directly in front of Marcus, close enough that he could see the strength in her eyes, close enough that he could smell the subtle perfume she wore, close enough that he could feel the power radiating from her like heat from a flame. And then she spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear, every word perfectly pronounced, every syllable carrying the weight of 15 years of pain transformed into power. "Hello, Marcus. You were right about one thing. Today, everything changes, but not in the way you expected." She turned to Victoria, whose red dress suddenly looked cheap in comparison to Elena's simple dignity. "Hello, Victoria. That dress is lovely. Did Marcus buy it for you? With money he borrowed using my forged signature? Oh yes, I know about that. I know about everything now." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Elena, what, how, the car?" She smiled. It was not a cruel smile like his had been. It was worse. It was a smile of someone who had already won and was simply enjoying the view. "The car? Oh, that is mine. A gift from my grandmother, along with $800 million and a business empire that makes yours look like a lemonade stand." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. 800 million. Business empire. Grandmother. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Elena had no rich grandmother. Elena had nothing. She was nothing. He had made sure of that. But the Rolls-Royce was real. The lawyer beside her was real. The transformation in her bearing was real, which meant the money was real, which meant everything had changed, which meant he had thrown away a fortune. "Shall we go inside?" Elena asked pleasantly. "We have a divorce to finalize. And, Marcus, I have some new terms to discuss. You see, when you forced me to sign that prenuptial agreement, you committed fraud. When you took loans using my signature, you committed forgery. When you hid assets during our marriage, you committed financial crimes. Mr. Harrison has all the evidence. So we can do this the easy way, where you give me everything I am owed. Or we can do this the hard way, where you end up in prison. Your choice." Marcus's legs wobbled. Victoria stepped away from him, her survival instincts kicking in. The reporters pressed closer, sensing the story had just become something bigger than a simple divorce. This was a reversal of fortune. A destruction of a man who had destroyed his wife. A rise of someone from ashes to empire. Elena walked past Marcus without waiting for his response. Mr. Harrison followed. The courthouse doors opened before them like gates to a new kingdom. Behind them, Marcus stood frozen on the steps, his practiced words of cruelty dead in his throat. The mock rehearsal he had planned would never happen. The humiliation he had arranged had become his own. Inside the courthouse, the divorce proceedings took exactly 1 hour. Marcus signed everything Elena demanded. He had no choice. The evidence Mr. Harrison presented was devastating. Financial fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, years of crimes hidden behind his successful facade. He gave Elena the house she had decorated with love. He gave her the cars. He gave her half his company. He gave her everything she asked for because the alternative was prison. And through it all, Elena remained calm, dignified, never cruel, never vengeful, simply firm, simply fair, simply powerful. When the judge pronounced them officially divorced, Elena stood up and looked at Marcus one last time. He looked smaller now, older, broken, like she had looked 6 months ago when he started his campaign to destroy her. "Marcus," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "you were wrong about me. I was never worthless. I was never nothing. I was just sleeping, waiting, growing. You thought you were breaking me, but you were actually creating me. The woman I am now exists because of what you did. So in a strange way, I should thank you. But I won't, because you do not deserve my gratitude. You do not deserve my anger. You do not deserve anything from me anymore. You are now what you always said I was. Nothing. And unlike you, I will not even take pleasure in that fact. I will simply forget you existed." She turned and walked out of the courtroom. Mr. Harrison followed. The reporters waited outside, but Elena did not stop to talk. She walked down the courthouse steps to where Catherine waited with the Rolls-Royce. The door opened. She entered. The door closed, and the car pulled away, leaving Marcus standing on the courthouse steps exactly as he had planned. Except he was the one left behind. He was the one humiliated. He was the one with nothing. The cameras captured his devastation. The moment when a man who thought he was king realized he was actually nothing. The moment when karma arrived not with noise but with the quiet purr of a Rolls-Royce engine. Elena's story spread across the city within hours, then across the country, then across the world. The housewife who inherited $800 million. The woman who arrived at her divorce in a Rolls-Royce. The phoenix who rose from ashes to empire. But Elena did not care about fame. She had work to do, an empire to run, a life to build. The John Corporation welcomed their new chairwoman with curiosity and skepticism. Who was this woman who had appeared from nowhere? Could she really manage an empire? Did she have what it took to lead? Elena answered their doubts not with words but with actions. She worked 18-hour days learning every aspect of the business. She studied financial reports until her eyes burned. She met with every department head, every manager, every employee who would talk to her. She listened. She learned. She led. Within 6 months, the company's profits increased by 30%. Within a year, they had expanded into 3 new countries. Within 2 years, Elena Jiang was recognized as one of the most successful businesswomen in Asia. The same people who had whispered about her failure now spoke her name with respect. The same friends who had abandoned her now tried to reconnect, but she had no time for false friendships. She was building something real, something powerful, something that belonged to her alone. She bought a new house, not a mansion like the one she had shared with Marcus, but a modest, beautiful home that felt like peace. She hired staff but treated them with kindness and respect, remembering what it felt like to be treated as worthless. She started a foundation for women escaping abusive marriages, providing them with housing, education, and hope. She gave millions to charity but never sought publicity for it. She did it because she remembered the nights when she had nothing and nobody helped. George, the taxi driver who had been kind to her, became the head of her personal transportation fleet. She bought him a house and sent his grandchildren to college. He cried when she told him, and she cried with him. They both remembered the day when she had nothing but a promise. Mr. Harrison became not just her lawyer, but her trusted advisor and friend. He guided her through the complexities of wealth with wisdom and patience. He protected her from those who would try to take advantage. He became the father figure she had never had. Catherine, her driver, became her personal assistant and eventually the CEO of one of her subsidiary companies. She had seen potential in Catherine that others had missed, just as her grandmother had seen potential in Elena and Marcus. Marcus lost everything within a year. The investigation into his financial crimes led to more discoveries. His company collapsed. His assets were seized. Victoria left him for another rich man the moment his money disappeared. He ended up exactly where he had said Elena would be, in a small apartment, alone, broken, working minimum wage jobs to survive. Sometimes he would see Elena's picture in business magazines. Sometimes he would hear about her latest success on the news. And every time, he remembered the morning he stood on the courthouse steps waiting to mock her. The morning she arrived in a Rolls-Royce and changed everything. But Elena never thought about Marcus. She had kept her promise. She had forgotten he existed. Her life was too full of purpose to waste on the past. She had companies to run, people to employ, women to help, a legacy to build. She dated occasionally but was in no hurry to marry again. She had learned that she did not need anyone to complete her. She was complete on her own. Whole, powerful, free. When journalists asked about her incredible transformation, she always gave the same answer. There was no transformation. I was always this person. I just needed to lose everything to find myself. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes the person who breaks you actually creates you. Sometimes you have to fall all the way down to learn that you can fly. 5 years after the divorce, Elena stood in her office on the top floor of the John Corporation headquarters. The city spread out below her like a kingdom she had conquered with wisdom instead of war. Her reflection in the window showed a woman completely different from the broken housewife who had once served dinner to people who mocked her. She wore a simple black dress, expensive but understated. Her hair was styled but not elaborate. Her jewelry was minimal but perfect. She looked like what she was, a woman who had found her power not through a man or through luck but through pain, transformed into purpose. Her phone rang. It was her assistant with the daily schedule. Meetings with international partners. A charity gala that evening. A flight to Tokyo tomorrow for a new acquisition. A full life. A meaningful life. A life that belonged to her completely. As she looked out at the city, Elena remembered the morning of her divorce. The empty apartment. The cracked mirror. The woman who thought she was nothing. She remembered the call that changed everything. The grandmother who had believed in her when nobody else did. The Rolls-Royce that had carried her to her new destiny. And she remembered Marcus's face when she stepped out of that car. The shock. The disbelief. The moment he realized he had thrown away a treasure while chasing fool's gold. But mostly, she remembered the promise she had made to her grandmother's lawyer. To never let anyone make her feel worthless again. To stand tall and claim her power. To rise from the ashes and build an empire. She had kept that promise. She had become everything Marcus said she could never be. Everything she had dreamed of being when she wrote in that notebook years ago. Everything her grandmother had seen in her from afar. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Jang, your car is ready." Elena smiled. It was a different car today. She had a fleet now. But sometimes, on special occasions, she still rode in the midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom, the one that had announced her arrival into a new life, the one that had carried her from humiliation to triumph, the one that reminded her that the worst ending can become the best beginning. She picked up her briefcase and headed to the elevator. Another day of building her empire. Another day of proving that a woman's worth is not determined by the man who leaves her, but by the strength she finds within herself. Another day of living the truth that Marcus had been too blind to see. That Elena Zhang was never nothing. She was everything. She just needed to lose him to find herself. As she walked through the lobby of her building, employees nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Miss Zhang." She nodded back, remembering when she was invisible. When people looked through her as if she did not exist. When her own husband introduced her as nobody important. Now she was somebody. Not because of inherited money, though that had been the catalyst, but because she had taken that opportunity and built something magnificent with it. She had proven that a housewife could become a CEO, that a woman labeled worthless could become invaluable, that someone thrown away could rise higher than the person who discarded them. The car pulled up to the entrance, not the Rolls-Royce today, but a Mercedes. Still beautiful, still powerful, still hers. As Catherine held the door open, Elena paused for a moment. She thought about all the women still trapped where she had been, in marriages that diminished them, in situations that crushed their spirits, in lives that made them feel like nothing. Her foundation had helped thousands, but there were millions more. Her next project would be bigger. A network of safe houses, educational programs, business incubators for women starting over. Everything she wished had existed when she was at her lowest. Everything that could help other women find their power. "Where to today, Miss Zhang?" Catherine asked. Elena looked at her schedule. The first meeting was with a group of international investors. They wanted to partner with the Zhang Corporation on a new venture. They had no idea they would be meeting with a woman who had once served coffee to men like them while they ignored her existence. They had no idea that the powerhouse CEO they were eager to impress had once been told she belonged only in a kitchen. They had no idea that Elena Zhang's story was more remarkable than any business success. But they would learn. Everyone who met her learned. That strength comes from struggle. That power comes from pain transformed. That sometimes the person everybody counts out becomes the person everybody counts on. To the office, Catherine. "We have an empire to run." The car pulled into traffic, carrying Elena toward another day of proving that the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is success. It is happiness. It is becoming so powerful that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. It is arriving in a Rolls Royce when they expected you to crawl. It is rising when they expected you to fall. It is becoming everything they said you could never be. Elena had done all of that and more. She had transformed pain into power, tears into triumph, nothing into everything. And this was only the beginning. Years later, when business students studied the rise of the John Corporation under Elena's leadership, they would focus on her strategies, her innovations, her bold decisions. But they would miss the most important lesson, that Elena Zhang's greatest business asset was not her inherited wealth or her sharp mind. It was her understanding of what it meant to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be labeled worthless. She saw potential in people others ignored. She promoted women who had been overlooked. She invested in ideas that seemed too small to matter, because she knew that the biggest treasures often come in the smallest packages, that the greatest power often rises from the deepest pain, that sometimes a housewife with nothing but a notebook full of dreams can build an empire that shakes the world. The story of her ex-husband was waiting to mock poor housewife on divorce day, but she arrived in Rolls-Royce became legend in business circles, not just because of the dramatic reversal of fortune, not just because of the wealth involved, but because it proved something that many had forgotten, that every person has value, that every dream matters, that every woman who has been told she is nothing carries within her the potential for everything. Elena Zhang proved that. She proved it by arriving when they expected her to run, by rising when they expected her to fall, by becoming powerful when they expected her to disappear, and by building an empire on the ashes of a marriage that had tried to destroy her. Marcus never recovered from that morning on the courthouse steps. He lived the rest of his life in the shadow of his mistake. The woman he had thrown away became one of the richest and most respected business leaders in the world. The wife he had called worthless became invaluable to thousands of employees and millions of customers. The person he had humiliated in front of everyone became someone everyone admired. He had been waiting to mock a poor housewife on divorce day. Instead, he watched an empress arrive in a Rolls Royce and claim her throne. He had practiced cruel words that were never spoken. He had prepared a humiliation that became his own. He had orchestrated a victory that became his greatest defeat. But Elena never looked back. She never gloated. She never sought revenge. She simply lived. Fully, powerfully, freely. She built her empire with wisdom and compassion. She helped thousands of women escape situations like hers. She proved that success is not about crushing those who hurt you, but about rising so high that their opinion becomes irrelevant. She proved that the best response to being called worthless is to become invaluable. That the best response to being discarded is to become indispensable. That the best response to being mocked is to become magnificent. And she did it all starting from that morning when she stepped out of a Rolls Royce and changed everything. The sunrise painted Elena's office golden as she finished reviewing the day's first reports. The Zhang Corporation had just closed its biggest deal yet. A partnership that would create jobs for 50,000 people, housing for families who needed it, hope for communities that had been forgotten. This was her true revenge. Not destroying Marcus, who had destroyed himself, but building something beautiful from the ashes of something broken, creating light from darkness, finding strength in suffering, transforming the worst thing that ever happened to her into the best thing that ever happened to countless others. Her assistant knocked and entered with tea and the morning newspapers. Elena's picture was on the front page of the business section again. Billionaire CEO Elena Zhang announces Revolutionary Women's Empowerment Initiative. The article talked about her latest project, a global network that would help 1 million women start their own businesses over the next 5 years. It was ambitious. Some said impossible. But Elena had learned that impossible was just another word for watch me. She had been told she was impossible, that success for her was impossible, that rising from where she had fallen was impossible. Yet here she sat in her office at the top of a building she owned, running an empire she had built, living a life she had created. The photo in the newspaper showed her at yesterday's press. Conference, confident, powerful, serene, nothing. Like the broken woman who had stood in an empty apartment 5 years ago with $4 in her purse. Nothing like the housewife who had been mocked at dinner parties. Nothing like the woman Marcus had expected to see crawling up the courthouse steps. Everything like the empress she had always been inside, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As Elena sipped her tea, she thought about the young women who would read that article. The ones trapped in situations like hers had been. The ones being told they were worthless. The ones crying themselves to sleep. The ones who believed their abusers were right. She wanted them to know the truth. That inside every woman who has been broken lies an empire waiting to be built. That inside every person who has been discarded lives a treasure waiting to be discovered. That inside every human being who has been called nothing lives everything waiting to emerge. All it takes is one moment, one opportunity, one decision to stop believing the lies and start building the truth. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "The Rolls-Royce is ready whenever you need it, Miss Jang." Elena smiled. She had kept that car, the midnight blue Phantom that had announced her arrival into her new life. She did not drive it often, but on special days, important days, days when she needed to remember how far she had come, she would sit in its leather seats and remember. Remember the woman who had nothing. Remember the man who had thrown her away. Remember the grandmother who had seen her worth. Remember the morning she stepped out of that car and changed everything. Today was one of those days. Today she was signing the papers to acquire Marcus's old company. It had been for sale for months. Nobody wanted it. Too much debt. Too much scandal. Too much association with failure. But Elena saw what others did not. She saw potential. She saw good employees who deserved better. She saw a chance to transform something broken into something beautiful, just like she had transformed herself. "Tell Catherine I'll need the rolls today," Elena texted back, "and ask her to take the long route to the signing. I want to drive past the old neighborhood." The old neighborhood. Where she had lived with Marcus in the mansion, she had made a home. Where she had hosted dinner parties for people who laughed at her. Where she had spent nights crying while he entertained Victoria in the room next door. Where she had been slowly erased until she almost disappeared completely. She did not go back there to reminisce or to feel sad. She went back to measure distance, to see how far she had traveled, to remind herself that the worst roads sometimes lead to the best destinations. An hour later, Elena sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce as it glided through streets filled with memories. There was the restaurant where Marcus had proposed, back when he had nothing but dreams and she had believed in them. There was the park where they had walked hand in hand before success changed him. There was the bank where he had cried in frustration when his first loan was rejected, and she had held him and told him not to give up. She had loved him once, truly, deeply, completely, but that love had been for a man who no longer existed, maybe had never really existed. The Marcus she had loved was perhaps just who she had wanted him to be, not who he really was. The car turned onto the familiar street. The mansion came into view. It looked different now, smaller somehow. The new owners had changed the garden. The roses she had planted were gone. The window where she used to stand and watch the sunrise was covered with different curtains. It was just a house now, not a home, not a prison, just walls and windows and memories that no longer hurt. "Shall I slow down, Miss Jang?" Catherine asked gently. She knew this history. She understood the significance. "No," Elena replied. "Keep driving. That's not my life anymore." They drove on to the building where the signing would take place. The lawyers were already there. The documents were ready. Marcus's former company would become part of the Jang Corporation. But more importantly, the 300 employees would keep their jobs. They would get better benefits. They would work for someone who valued them. They would discover what it meant to be led by someone who understood struggle. Elena signed the papers with the same pen she had used to sign her divorce papers 5 years ago. It seemed fitting. The end of one story, the beginning of another. The transformation of pain into purpose once again. That evening, Elena attended the charity gala she had founded. Women in beautiful dresses who had once been in situations like hers. Women who had escaped. who had rebuilt, who had risen. They did not know she was the anonymous donor who paid for their education. They did not know she was the one who had provided their safe housing. They did not know that their Phoenix story had been funded by another Phoenix. And that was how Elena wanted it. The spotlight was theirs tonight. The victory was theirs to celebrate. She stood in the back of the room watching them laugh and dance and live. Free, powerful, whole. This was her true success. Not the money, not the empire, but this. These women who had discovered what she had discovered, that they were never worthless. They were priceless. They just needed someone to believe in them the way her grandmother had believed in her. One of the women, a young mother named Grace, took the microphone to speak. She talked about her escape from an abusive marriage, her nights in shelters, her fear that she would never be anything more than what her ex-husband had said she was. Nothing. Worthless. A burden. But then she had found the foundation, had been given a chance, had discovered she was brilliant at accounting, was now the CFO of a small but growing company, had bought her own house, had shown her daughters that women could be anything, that women were everything. Elena wiped a tear from her eye as Grace spoke. This was why she had built her empire, not for revenge, not for glory, but for this, for Grace, for all the Graces, for every woman who needed to know that the worst chapter of her story did not have to be the last chapter. As the gala ended and Elena walked to her car, a young reporter approached. "Ms. Zhang, can you tell us the secret to your success?" Elena paused. She thought about all the complicated answers she could give. The business strategies, the financial planning, the market analysis. But instead, she gave the simple truth. "The secret to my success? I was once told I was worthless, and I chose to prove that wrong. Not to the person who said it, but to myself. That's the only person whose opinion really matters." The reporter scribbled notes eagerly. "Is it true you arrived at your divorce in a Rolls-Royce?" Elena smiled, that same small secret smile from 5 years ago. "Yes, my ex-husband was waiting to mock me. He had practiced his cruel words. He had invited cameras to document my humiliation. He expected me to arrive broken. But I arrived in a Rolls-Royce, not to hurt him, but to honor myself, to announce that I was not what he said I was, that I was not nothing, that I was everything. And that car was just the beginning." The reporter leaned forward eagerly. "Do you ever speak to your ex-husband?" "No," Elena replied simply. "He is part of a past that no longer defines me. I wish him peace, but I do not wish him presence in my life. When you truly heal, you do not need to revisit the wound. You do not need to prove anything to the person who hurt you. You just need to live, fully, freely, fearlessly." She walked to the Rolls-Royce where Catherine waited. As she settled into the leather seats, she thought about where life had taken her. From serving dinner to people who ignored her, to running boardroom meetings with international leaders. From being called worthless to being worth billions. From having nothing to having everything. From being mocked to being magnificent. But the money was just numbers. The power was just responsibility. The real transformation was internal. She had learned to love herself when someone else stopped loving her. She had learned to value herself when someone else called her worthless. She had learned to believe in herself when someone else stopped believing. That was the real fortune her grandmother had left her. Not just the money, but the message that came with it. That Elena was worthy. That Elena was powerful. That Elena was enough. Had always been enough. Would always be enough. The money just made it easier for the world to see what had always been true. As the Rolls-Royce carried her home through the city lights, Elena made a decision. Tomorrow she would announce her biggest project yet. A global initiative to help 10 million women over the next decade. Education, housing, healthcare, business opportunities, everything a woman needed to transform pain into power. It would cost billions. It would take years. It would be the hardest thing she had ever done. But she would do it. Because somewhere tonight a woman was crying in an empty apartment believing she was nothing. Somewhere tonight a woman was being mocked at a dinner table. Somewhere tonight a woman was being told she was worthless. And Elena wanted every one of those women to know what she now knew, that the darkest night produces the brightest stars. that the deepest pain produces the greatest strength, that the worst ending can become the best beginning. The car pulled up to her home. Not the mansion from her marriage, but the peaceful house she had chosen for herself, where every room reflected her taste, where every corner held her choices, where every space was truly hers. Catherine opened the door. "Have a beautiful evening, Ms. Zhang." "You too, Catherine." "And thank you for everything." Catherine smiled. She had been there from the beginning, had seen the transformation, had watched Elena rise from ashes to empire. "It's been an honor, Miss Zhang." Elena walked into her house. The lights were warm. The silence was peaceful. Not the horrible silence of loneliness, but the beautiful silence of solitude, of being complete in oneself, of needing no one's approval, of knowing one's worth absolutely. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window looking out at the city. 5 years ago, she had stood at a different window, broken and lost. Now she stood whole and found. The journey between those two moments had been the hardest and best thing that had ever happened to her. Marcus had meant to destroy her. Instead, he had freed her. He had meant to humiliate her. Instead, he had elevated her. He had meant to leave her with nothing. Instead, he had given her everything. Because in losing him, she had found herself. In losing that life, she had gained this one. In losing what she thought she needed, she had gained what she actually deserved. Her phone rang. It was a business call from Tokyo. The new acquisition was going perfectly. The employees were excited. The transformation was beginning. Another broken company becoming beautiful. Another group of people discovering their worth. Another proof that resurrection was possible. That rising was possible. That becoming everything after being called nothing was not just possible but inevitable for those who refused to give up. Elena handled the call with the expertise of someone who had learned every aspect of business from the ground up. She made decisions worth millions as casually as she once made grocery lists. She solved problems that would have terrified her 5 years ago. She led with the strength she had not known she possessed. When the call ended, Elena sat in her favorite chair with a book. Not a business book, but poetry. Words about transformation, about rising, about becoming. She read until her eyes grew tired. Then she walked to her bedroom, the one she had decorated exactly as she wanted. No compromise, no asking permission. Just her choices, her comfort, her space. Before she slept, she did what she did every night. She looked at the photo on her nightstand. Not of Marcus. She had no photos of him, but of her grandmother. The stern woman with sharp eyes who had seen Elena's worth from afar, who had believed when no one else did, who had provided the opportunity for transformation. "Thank you," Elena whispered to the photo, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for giving me the chance to become who I was always meant to be." She turned off the light and settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to help women rise, new moments to prove that worthlessness was a lie and everyone had infinite worth. But tonight she rested. The woman who had arrived in a Rolls-Royce when they expected her to crawl. The woman who had risen when they expected her to fall. The woman who had become everything when they said she was nothing. Miles away, in a small apartment, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every night was the same. The memory of that morning at the courthouse. Elena stepping out of the Rolls-Royce. The shock. The realization. The regret that ate at him like poison. He had practiced words to destroy her. She had arrived and destroyed him with her presence alone. He had planned to document her humiliation. The cameras had captured his devastation instead. He had waited to mock a poor housewife. An empress had arrived instead. He had lost everything. The money, the company, the reputation, the friends who had only cared about his wealth. Victoria had left him the moment the money disappeared, moving on to another rich man without a backward glance. But none of that hurt as much as knowing what he had thrown away. Elena, the woman who had loved him truly, who had supported him completely, who had believed in him absolutely, who had been worth more than all the money in the world, and he had called her worthless. Now she was one of the richest women in the world, and he was nobody. She was respected and admired, and he was forgotten. She was building an empire of compassion and success, and he was barely surviving. The cruelest irony was that she had offered him generous terms in the divorce. Even after everything he had done, she had not sought to destroy him. The destruction had come from his own crimes being exposed, his own lies catching up, his own karma arriving. She had simply walked away and built her life while his collapsed on its own. He had done this to himself, and that knowledge was the worst punishment of all. Sometimes Marcus would see her on magazine covers or in news articles, always composed, always successful, always rising higher. She never mentioned him in interviews, never spoke about the marriage. It was as if he had never existed in her life, as if those 15 years had been erased and replaced with something infinitely better. He wanted to reach out, to apologize, to beg forgiveness, but he knew it would be pointless. Elena had moved on so completely that his apology would mean nothing. His regret would change nothing. His existence in her life had become nothing. Exactly what he had said she was. Nothing. The word echoed in his mind every night. The cruel word he had used to destroy her had become his own reality. Meanwhile, Elena slept peacefully. No dreams of the past. No nightmares of humiliation. Just rest. The rest of someone who had transformed pain into power, who had turned mockery into magnificence, who had arrived in a Rolls-Royce when they expected her to crawl, who had risen so high that the person who hurt her became invisible below, who had proven that the best revenge was not revenge at all but becoming so successful, so happy, so complete that the past became irrelevant. Tomorrow she would continue building, continue rising, continue helping others rise. The woman who had once been mocked as a worthless housewife would change millions of lives. The woman who had once served dinner to people who ignored her would lead corporations and charities that changed the world. The woman who had once been told she was nothing would prove every day that every person was everything. They just needed someone to believe in them, someone to give them a chance, someone to show them that rising was possible. And it all started with a Rolls-Royce, a midnight blue phantom that announced to the world that Elena Zhang had arrived, not just at a courthouse but at her destiny, not just at a divorce but at her transformation, not just at an ending but at a beginning. The beginning of everything she was meant to be, everything she had always been inside, everything that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment when she stepped out of the car and faced the man who thought he had destroyed her, when she looked him in the eye and showed him that he had actually created her, when she walked up those courthouse steps not as a victim but as a victor, when she proved that sometimes the person who breaks you actually builds you, that sometimes losing everything means gaining everything, that sometimes being called worthless is the first step to discovering you are priceless. The city slept around them. Marcus in his small apartment, haunted by regret. Elena in her peaceful home, blessed by peace. One destroyed by cruelty given. One elevated by cruelty transformed into power. One fallen from trying to push someone down. One risen from being pushed down and refusing to stay there. The story of their divorce had become legend. The story of Elena's rise had become inspiration. The story of the Rolls-Royce had become symbol. A symbol that no matter how far you fall, you can rise. No matter how broken you become, you can heal. No matter what someone says you are, you can become who you really are. No matter how they expect you to arrive, you can arrive in your own way, in your own time, in your own power. Elena Zhang had arrived in a Rolls-Royce on the worst day of her life and made it the best day of her life. She had taken mockery and made it into majesty. She had taken humiliation and made it into elevation. She had taken nothing and made it into everything. And she had done it all starting from that morning when Marcus waited to mock a poor housewife. But she arrived in a Rolls-Royce instead. The morning that changed everything. The morning that proved that the end of one story could be the beginning of a better one. The morning that showed that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. If you have the courage to arrive differently than they expect. If you have the strength to rise when they expect you to fall. If you have the wisdom to become everything when they call you nothing. This is the story of her ex-husband was waiting to mock poor housewife on divorce day, but she arrived in Rolls-Royce. Not just a story of reversal of fortune, but a story of transformation of spirit. Not just a story of wealth gained, but a story of worth discovered. Not just a story of a woman who got revenge, but a story of a woman who got free. Completely free. Powerfully free. Magnificently free. And in her freedom, she freed thousands of others. Showed them that rising was possible. That worth was inherent. That power could be claimed. That arriving in a Rolls-Royce was not about the car, but about the statement. The statement that said, I am not what you said I was. I am not broken. I am not worthless. I am not nothing. I am everything. I always was. I always will be. And now, finally, everyone can see it. The end.